Hi, this video is going to go over the basics of quote integration. This is the basic format that you'll use when citing a quote in your paragraph. So we want to first introduce our quote with a lead-in phrase, and in this example, that includes the author's name. The lead-in phrase just gives context for the quote, so you're not just throwing the quote at your reader out of nowhere. So this lead-in phrase is Hecker writes, Hecker's the author. And then I have the quote. You'll notice I have quotation marks around it, and I have to add those when I take any words out of the story so that I'm indicating that these are not my own words, these are words that came from somewhere else. And then I am adding a citation at the end, which says what page this comes from. So if anyone wants to look up this quote, they will know where to look for that. I will also just point out that every quote needs to be integrated along with the author's name and the page number. So we have those two pieces of information here. And I also just wanted to emphasize the punctuation. So regardless of whether your quote ended with a period or not, you are not going to have a period in between the quote and the citation. If you had a period at the end of that quote, you are moving it to after the citation. If there wasn't a period at the end of the quote, you are still adding a period after the citation. And the reason for that is we don't want our citation just hanging out by itself. We want it to be part of the same sentence as the quote, right? So we don't want a period in between the quote and that citation. All right. So let's look at an example. So this is my quote from the text, and there are no quotation marks around it because it was just regular narration in the text. And then when I turned it into a quote, I added a lead-in phrase at the beginning, Hecker writes. I put quotation marks around that sentence, and then I added the page number and a period at the end. So I've moved that period that was right at the end of the spoke, and I put it after the citation, so the page number is included. All right, so this is another kind of a variation on that basic format. So we're still going to have our lead-in phrase here, but I decided for this one to give a little bit of context of what's happening in the story instead of just starting with the author's name, writes. And then I still have my quote that looks exactly the same. But then the only difference here is that I am adding the author's name into the citation because I didn't have the author's name in the lead-in. So the author's name should appear exactly once, either in the lead-in or in the citation. So here's my example. I have my lead-in phrase in the magic show, my quote in quotation marks, and then I have the author's name and the page number at the end. So one more complicating factor on these. So for this example, in the story, a character was talking, right? So it was something like Rosara said, and then there were quotation marks in the story. So when I took that quote out of the story, what I've done is used single quotes to show that a character was talking in the story. And then I've used double quotes the same way I was using them on the previous slides to show that these are words from the story, not my own words. So it does look a little funny with those three quotes, but anytime you're quoting something a character says, that's what it should look like. And I still have the author's last name and page number at the end. One more note is that whenever a character is speaking, you want to have their name in the lead-in phrase, so it's clear that a character is talking. All right, so I've broken down the example on this one a little bit more. So you'll notice here, this is the quote as it appears in the text. It's a rich people's party, and that was a character said that, so there were quotes around it in the text. That's exactly what it looked like in the story. So when I take that text to use it as a quote, my first thing that I need to do is add quotation marks around it to show that these are words from the story. Right, so I've kept the red quotes here are from the story. I've added the blue ones, which are mine. But that looks silly, right? So then I am taking those double quotes from the story and turning them into the single quotes here. All right, and now I have that same exact format as I had in the example up there, right, where the single quotes show its dialogue, the double quotes show I am quoting it. One more example of this same thing. So in this example, I'm actually quoting something that a character is saying, and then some narration, and then something that a character is saying. So that's going to be a little bit trickier, but we're going to follow the same process. So the first thing I'm going to do again is put my own quotation marks around all of the words that I'm taking from the story. But then I have way too many double quotes, right? So then the next thing I'm going to do is turn those double quotes into single quotes. So you'll see I have the inside those the blue double quotes. I now have the single quotes around the first piece of dialogue, and then the single quotes again around the second piece of dialogue. All right, this is the last slide, and this just goes over how to deal with quotes that end with a question mark or an exclamation point. So as we looked at before, if you have a quote that ends with a period, you are moving that period to after the citation. We can't do that with question marks and exclamation points because those both change the meaning of the quote and how it would be said, right? So we actually need to keep that question mark in the quote. But then we still want to add a period at the end because we still don't want the citation to be lonely all by itself. So for these, we are going to have the two pieces of punctuation, question mark still in the quote because it was there in the original, and then citation, and then the period to end the sentence. And that's all. Thanks for listening and happy writing.